Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a brand new weapon. So I can't believe it, a year into this game's release, we're still finding new weapons, but this is going to be a showcase for the Bloodhound Fang. It's a great curved greatsword with a really special Ash of War that is so... Okay, so jokes aside, yeah, we've all seen the Bloodhound Fang. It's probably the most popular weapon in Elden Ring PvP for quite a while. It's up there with Moonveil and Rivers of Blood as just something you see all the time in PvP, but because I saw it so much just since the game's release, I never actually used it, and so now I'm really happy to be giving it a try and just kind of giving it its due. I think it's a weapon that, you know, hundreds of thousands of Tarnished have used over the course of this game's lifespan, and you know, just checking out what all the fuss is about. So longtime fans of this channel will note that I've got the Mushroom Crown on, which means we are going to be going for some elements of poison and or rot, and that is something I love to incorporate in a lot of my builds. I think it's a great way to pressure people. So we'll have the offhand Antspur Rapier, and we've got that Poison Infused, and we also have Poisonous Mist. So I like to start things off with just using that and getting a quick AR boost with the Mushroom Crown and Poison proc, and then we also have some Rot Grease that we can put on the Bloodhound Fang. And we'll take a deeper dive into the full setup for this build at the end of the video if you want to skip ahead, but otherwise that's all I wanted to say regarding what we're going to be using. We'll go ahead and jump into the invasions and arena content. If you wouldn't mind considering subscribing, I definitely appreciate it. But yeah, let's go ahead and see how this performs. All right, jumping into this first invasion, we have kind of an appetizer 2v1 just in the Castle Soul area, and we get a nice headshot with the fan daggers. It does stun our opponent, so that's kind of a nice moment there. And then we do get our poison proc that we're looking for, so our AR is now boosted and we can start pressuring with the Bloodhound Fang. We've got our opponent, you know, kind of on their back foot, and we go for a nice roll catch with the Ash of War, the Bloodhound Fang. So I really like that as a roll catch. I think it does a great job of, you know, applying a lot of damage all at once, and then as our opponent here goes for Lion's Claw, we're able to backstab that, so that does leave you open to a backstab. We go for the Bloodhound's Finesse another time, but we don't land that hit, and we just get a couple more hits in as this host is really spamming the Lion's Claw, so we just need to kind of be careful about that, and then we get a nice jumping attack with just our backswing, and that's enough to finish off that 2v1 in nice fashion. So moving on, we have a little bit more of a tense 3v1, and this is in an area where the host has not opened up the pathway, so that's a illusory wall, and there is an elevator here. So I decide that I want to stay in this area, so what I do is I back up and send the elevator up. I was also hoping to isolate my opponent here and send them up on the elevator too, but they kind of smartly jump back down and continue the pressure in this 2v1 situation. Having the element of surprise to turn it into a 2v1 from a 3v1 was also extremely useful, so I was happy to have kind of the high damage output of the Bloodhound Fang, and it wasn't really worth it to go for the early poison proc in that instance because I had a higher damaging output weapon like the Bloodhound Fang on hand, and I had the element of surprise to kind of, you know, get that burst damage off as fast as possible. So, you know, we really need to use the walls and the kind of elevator shaft to get a little space from our opponents and not get blendered by them. So I really don't want to get caught between both of them at the same time, and I also want to make sure that I have enough health. So here we do see a moment where my opponent there, the host, was doing a good job of trying to kind of squeeze me between the two walls and the opponents, and they, you know, I was able to get past them as they went for their Ash of War. So their idea was correct, but their execution was just either a little too slow or their pressure wasn't enough. Going for something like Poisonous Mist is going to be a little bit delayed, so I was able to get around them, and now I'm just in a one-on-one situation. So I really reset things here. I drink my FP flask, I make sure I get rid of all status procs, and they really should have taken this moment to heal if they did have any flasks, but they don't, and I'm going for a jumping attack and then followed it up with just a slightly charged heavy, and that slightly charged heavy is great for a roll catch. The range on this weapon is quite substantial, so a lot of times I found I was able to get that roll catch with the heavy attack, and definitely recommend it. This next invasion was pretty intense. We are in kind of tight corners with a group of three that is hard to deal with. So we have somebody that's kind of going for parry spam with golden parry, and that's That's hard to play against for sure, especially if they're blocking a lot. There's not a lot we can do. They're they're gonna be blocking 100% of physical damage, and I'm not gonna have a ton of time to really react to that. And jumping attacks are really my best bet because they aren't parryable, and I need to be really cautious that I don't throw out some predictable attacks. So I also try to get some poison in the mix, and I didn't think they were going to be able to parry Poisonous Mist, so I felt it was kind of a safe play. But now that Rivers of Blood is in the mix as well, and there's just kind of this continuous pressure from everybody, and it's not really safe to go for neutral attacks, which is what I would normally like to do, just because that will, stun everybody and at least relieve some of the pressure. I realize that the weapon that I have on hand right now is not exactly the right tool for the job, so I start backing off and actually get cornered, and just in time I'm able to jump over the player that's blocking with the shield, so that was pretty clutch there. And here I do switch over to the right tool for the job, which is going to be the Stormhawk Axe, and go for a quick turn and burn as I come around the corner and get the Thunderstorm Ash of War off and turn this 3v1 into a one-on-one. And now it's just me and the host. I don't have to worry about the golden parry spam, and I can begin pressuring this host here with the Bloodhound's Fang. So I let them go for that Dragon Claw attack and then just punish it with a quick jumping attack. I know the recovery frames are pretty long, and then just continue pressure and kind of delay a neutral light attack and get them while their shield is not up and come out on top. This next invasion is going to start off a little bit rough, where I don't see the incoming attack from the host and do manage to get hit by both their attack and the incoming attack from the Phantom. So it starts off kind of poorly, where I need to heal a little bit, but now I've used the staircase kind of successfully to just isolate this one opponent and get the poison proc off. So now I have my nice boosted AR, and when they go for a Bolus, I'm able to jump over the stairs and get a nice jumping attack and then roll catch with the Ash of War. And we'll see in this invasion just how effective that Ash of War is as a roll catch. So I start pressuring the host now, and I do need to look out for their Ash of War. This is definitely one that can do quite a bit of damage, and there I just get the single light attack followed up by the Ash of War and kill the host. And then here we get it a third time where we stun lock with the Ash of War, or stun rather, with the neutral light attack and then land the Ash of War. And it's just a not too difficult 3v1. There's kind of poor coordination between that group of people, and I think that definitely helped. If you do have an invader in your world, it really behooves you to kind of work together, and we didn't see that too much. So next up we have a 3v1, and this was one that really kind of tested my patience. It was kind of a long fought, hard fought battle with a couple different setups. So again, we have a host that is really just not super aggressive, but is going for high damage attacks that can take up a lot of space. So my playstyle, if you're familiar with my channel at all, you'll know that I usually go for the host last, and this type of playstyle from the host can be a challenge, just because if the Phantom stays around the host and the host is continuously going for something like Waves of Darkness, they'll oftentimes catch you. So I'm really just trying to bait my Phantom opponent here into being a little bit more aggressive, and I also have the benefit of the added chip damage of poison. We can see here just how useful that is. Even though I get hit, I'm not able to come in for a melee attack. The poison does everything I need it to do to take care of that Phantom. But now we have a little bit more of a challenge as the second Phantom comes in, and they're using Bloodhound Step as well as Claws with the Blood Flame Blade, so bleed is going to be a potential issue. And I really need to delay my attacks here. What I want to do is just kind of assume that they're going to go for Bloodhound Step and show up on one of my sides. So when I'd normally go for attack, I want to wait, and then when they finish Bloodhound Step, hopefully I'll be in the startup frames of my attack and we'll be able to catch them before they land their attack. So doing that is kind of tricky. Going for fully charged heavies or something is going to be a great way to kind of catch players that are using Bloodhound Step. I definitely recommend that approach, just because you do get the beginning of your attack animation, but then you can delay it for quite a while, and usually by the time your attack comes out, they will have Bloodhound stepped and shown up near you. Now, using a Curved Greatsword is going to be definitely something that's beneficial for that type of tactic, because it has such a wide sweeping area and you don't really need to guess where they're going to kind of pop up, like if they're going to pop up behind you or on either side. But that's kind of just a long-winded explanation to say that I find the Curved Greatsword class to be pretty strong when dealing with Bloodhound Fang, or Bloodhound Step rather, sorry. So we do get the poison, but they are also using regen, so those two things kind of end up canceling out, and we really just need to be patient with this player, and using the Antspur Rapier is going to probably be a better choice because the quickness of it is actually pretty helpful considering how low poise they have. So the fact that we'll be able to stun them every time we land the Antspur attack, it's going to be great. And then also if we can get some rot as well as poison in the mix, that's also going to be useful. So I think if a player is using Bloodhound Step with really low poise, a thrusting sword is going to be beneficial, but if they have high poise, then something like a Curved Greatsword or something with just a wide sweeping attack is going to be pretty helpful to deal with it. So we're really, trading quite a bit. I'd really like to get this player just because their play style is a little bit frustrating to deal with. So I read kind of the moment there that I have enough health to just tank a couple hits and get a few of my rapier attacks off, and it ends up being successful. It was very close though with the amount of blood loss in the mix. If I had been bled in that instance, I think I would have died, but now it's just a one-on-one with the host. They weren't too much of a factor throughout the course of this invasion, so I can kind of take my time, and even if I'm just getting phantom procs, now that I've got the rot in the mix, I know I'll be at least getting some rot buildup going. They don't have a ton of health, so they start just going for some blocks to acknowledge the situation they're in, and I'm able to come out on top from a 3v1 that was a little bit difficult, especially when you're dealing with something like bleed and claws and Bloodhound Step. So next up we have a 2v1, and I'm not 100% sure if this Phantom was over-leveled, but they are using a light roll build with a full kind of Melania cosplay, I guess, with some dragon incantations. So slightly unusual there, but, whatever you want to do, that's fine with me. And I just need to take a minute to buff here, and I really want to focus on getting my poison proc early, so I don't take too much damage initially, but then get a little aggressive with the Antspur Rapier and take a little bit more damage. So rolling out there probably would have been the way to go, but we at least got the poison proc, which means the AR boost is in effect, and we can begin pressuring this player that's going for Scarlet Aeonia right now. And unfortunately, I get stunned just before the Scarlet Aeonia hits, and that means I get hit with that, so I think I would have been able to roll it effectively had I not gotten hit by the host, but that's just something you need to look out for, and I guess my poise was somewhat lower than normal. This is a 1-on-1 poise build, so getting hit by a single straight sword is typically not something that you would need to worry about, but if you have not been poise counting like I wasn't in that moment, you can still get stunned, and that can be a potential issue when a big Ash of War comes in. So having that kind of in mind is going to help you be a really successful player. If you can kind of understand where your poise is at and understand the different weapons in the mix, you may be able to better judge a situation and potentially play a little bit more safely. So here I have very little health. Their Ash of War was pretty successful, but I do manage to get just a free aim pot throw and come out successfully there against the host. And I think there we get, close to 100,000 runes, so at level 138, it's a pretty safe bet to assume that they were over-leveled, and once the host doesn't have the backup of the Phantom, it's pretty quick work to just come out on top there with a couple hits with the Bloodhound Fang, and then the offhand Rapier is enough to deliver that final chip damage. So next up we have a 3v1, and this was a fairly difficult group. I had a pretty bad connection with the host, which you'll see throughout the course of this invasion. My damage definitely came in late, and there was just some weird packet lossy moments. And then we also have two Phantoms with pretty strong bleed setups. So we have Mohg's Spear, as well as Reduvia Bloodblade on a light rolling player. So fairly frustrating group to deal with, especially with the packet loss. There you can see just like no stun happens on the host, and they just kind of Miyazaki shuffle away. So I need to really back off here. I'm pretty low on health, and I'd be happy to get some PvE in the mix. So the Clean Rot Knight over there will eventually kind of wander in, and I decide that I need to take it a little bit more slowly. The host does a good job of kind of sneaking up on me and going for the Alabaster Lord's pull, but I do have enough time to react and just kind of roll it. And I'm really trying to bait them in towards this area that's a little bit more claustrophobic for them, where they can't just kind of stand around and deliver a bunch of hits without any kind of retribution from me or the PvE. And then I switch over to the Great Bow, and I think this was a good idea just because I did want to bait them, and I also wanted to punish the fact that they were distracted by the PvE. And then here I go for an unlocked shot with Rain of Arrows, and don't get stun locked out of it, or stunned rather, and just manage to continue with that particular Ash of War, which is going to be pretty helpful. And here I'm kind of, you know, aware of that wall play that they're going for, so that time I was able to use that to my advantage, go for Poisonous Mist, and deliver the poison proc through the wall while they were going for their Ash of War. And that was just a nice moment where I got a good read on that player and what they were trying to do, and it was kind of a moment where I had learned from the previous player's actions. So now I can kind of begin pressuring the second Phantom with Mohg's Spear, and it's they're pretty low on health, so I don't need to worry too much, and the packet loss of the host is just a little bit scary, but I am able to finally catch the Phantom here, and now it's just a one-on-one. I'm not 100% sure how this is going to go, given just the way they're moving around the map, but I, start going in for swings and start spamming a little bit. And what's actually kind of funny is just the host going for parries, and the fact that they go for parries with the connection that we have just kind of boggled my mind, and I was absolutely not worried about it. It's like there's no way that they're going to land a parry, so they go for their first parry there, and then they do land it. But given the connection, they aren't able to get a riposte. So a very sad moment there for the host, but I'm able to come in and grab a jumping attack and finish them off. So yeah, sometimes parries are just not worth it. Even if you do land it, you might not get the riposte, and it's definitely a struggle. So next up we have a 3v1 with a blue, a Phantom, and a host. And this one, I just kind of liked the rhythm of this fight, where we have kind of a one-on-one here with a fairly patient player with the Ultra Greatsword, and I'm able to deliver 2 hits, just kind of read their second attack. I figured they might be kind of aggressive, and we are getting some Phantom procs here, so the poison and rot in the mix is going to be a factor. And then here we just kind of read their Lion's Claw attack, which was a very bold move, especially given the space, and we're able to get a backstab. And now the Phantom comes in with the dual cross Naginatas, and this is really a difficult space for them to maneuver, and then as they die, the host comes in. So I just thought it was kind of fun the way that, it was 3 continuous one-on-ones. People just kind of kept dropping down, and the PvE got the host at the last minute there. So not good coordination between the 3 different players, and that allowed me to just come out on top. All right, so this next invasion is going to be another 3v1, and this one was definitely difficult. We had not much room to maneuver, and just a fairly good coordination between 3 different players. So I knew that there was a player hiding behind the wall, and I was hoping to just, be able to dodge their incoming attacks, but they hit me with Moonveil, or Moonlight Greatsword rather, and do quite a bit of damage. So now I feel like I need to kind of get out of that area, and then I see that somebody else is buffing behind a wall, so I try to get in a couple different attacks there, and they are able to get away. There's just too much damage coming my way for me to be able to continue pressuring, so I decide to back off, and I think that was definitely the right move. And now with the incoming spells, I can use this kind of banister to save myself a little bit, and I also can kind of draw them towards the PvE. I can see that if I stay in that area, just the amount of projectile spam is going to be a problem. So I switch over to the Great Bow, and this turned into more of a Great Bow fight than a Bloodhound Fang fight. And I do start using the Bloodhound Fang more later on, but I also think this is a good example of just when to switch over to something that is projectile based and using it as a way to bait your opponents in towards you, and then being able to be kind of quick on the weapon swap when they do get close, so you can switch over to a little bit safer melee attacks. I think that's the way to go. So they take care of the PvE in that section, so I decide to retreat some more and see if I can bait them towards some more PvE. I saw that it was effective for the chip damage I was able to get with the Great Bow, and just with the angle the arrows come out and the angle that the spells come out, I'm definitely in a good spot where it's easier for me to hit with my attacks than it is for them to hit with their spells. So I start using Rain of Arrows as well, given the small space that they're in, I am pretty confident that it'll be effective. And here we can see, the banisters are just really working in my favor to block the incoming spells, but I'm still able to successfully use the great bow. So just getting some shots off with the golem arrows is going to be great. They do quite a bit of damage, and they're a nice way to kind of relieve some of the pressure and get some chip damage for pretty much everybody in the group. So they kind of continuously try to ignore the PvE and get chip damage on me, but they're having a much harder time. They have a lot more to contend with, and the fact that the arrows come out so fast and just the fact that they knock you over, it is really helpful for the way I was able to play this particular invasion. And what I really want to do is just kind of bait them towards me. If I can get them up close and personal, I feel very confident that with the PvE in the mix, I'll be able to, use the Bloodhound Fang and get some of that high damage off. But the giant squid here has decided to participate a little bit more, and it's helpful to have in the mix. I think the kind of militia soldiers are a little bit more useful, but I start going for Rain of Arrows some more, and I've really knocked off about half their health every single time I've used Rain of Arrows, so I don't see any problem with continuously using it. And here we're finally able to get this down into a 2v1, and now I feel pretty comfortable knowing that the mage here is out of the picture, that I can switch over to something like the Bloodhound Fang, get some melee attacks in. And I think I read the situation correctly, because as soon as the Phantom kind of goes in for a one-on-one, I'm able to take them out. At this point, the squid is no longer interested in participating in the fight and jumps over the edge, and that turns this into just a one-on-one with me and the host. So I start applying some buffs. I have the time and the space to, use Poisonous Mist, and then I also switch over to the Drawstring Rot Grease here, just so I can get that little bit of extra pressure with the rot buildup that comes from now both the Anspur Rapier and the Bloodhound Fang. So my opponent gets a couple good chip hits in, but I'm able to kind of reset to neutral. They go for Piercing Fang out of neutral, which is a little bit dangerous, and I'm able to roll into that and grab a backstab, and having that AR boost from the poison proc was definitely helpful in delivering just a little bit of extra damage in the process. Our last invasion is just kind of a bonus invasion, just shows how useful Rain of Arrows is, and then we get a nice double hit on the host and the Phantom. We go for one more direct hit on the Phantom, and at that point, things are kind of over. It's nice to help out our fellow invader, and we just get the nice W here. Moving on to the duel portion of the showcase, we have a player that goes for Black Flame's protection pretty early on, so I also buff with some Crab just so I can get some of that physical damage negation. And I'm really going to be trying to focus on reads for this player, so they bring in Catch Flame, and that's a little bit of a surprise, but I'm able to catch them once with a neutral attack, and then a second one, and then a heavy attack, and then a Bloodhound Finesse. So those four things rather, do quite a bit of health, even with all the benefits of the Black Flame protection, and that just puts them into one-shot range, and then I'm able to go for a jumping attack and finish that opponent off. So next we'll just see kind of how deadly the Curved Greatsword class can be, especially with the extra range that you get on Bloodhound Fang. So this player makes kind of one mistake, and then I'm able to punish it with just a couple swings that really do almost all of their health immediately. And that's kind of just what can happen if you're playing against a Curved Greatsword like this one, where you get some added iframes and some hyper armor for the Ash of War, and so even if your opponent would normally stun you out of that, you're able to still deliver your hit and just do massive damage in the process. Next up, we have a player that uses several buffs, and I always find it kind of interesting when somebody goes for like 3 or 4 buffs at the beginning of a fight, but I let them go for their buffs and just try to, play pretty well, maybe get some Crab in the mix, so I have a little bit of buff for myself, but, sometimes players that use a whole bunch of buffs at the beginning aren't actually that optimized, or maybe just kind of rely on those buffs more than they should. So I definitely go for, just some reads on the play and see that this player is pretty aggressive, do manage to get a roll catch with the Ash of War, and then come out on top again. So pretty happy there, especially with all the buffs in the mix. Here I see a player that's going to be using a bleed build, so I make sure to change my talismans accordingly. And here we can just see how nice the heavy attack and then, follow up with the Bloodhound Fang Finesse is going to be. I found that it was there were so many times where I'd be able to land the heavy as a roll catch and then follow it up with Bloodhound's Finesse, and it would just work out fantastically. So here, another example of that. So that 3-hit combo where you go for a light attack, it stuns them, they roll out, you hit them with a heavy. If that connects, then going for Bloodhound Finesse. It just works phenomenally. I found that it was great. And it took me a little while to figure out where the Ash of War should be incorporated in with my attacks. Having been parrying so many people that used it, I was kind of hesitant to use it too often, but I find that if you don't use it just out of neutral and try to incorporate it in kind of an unpredictable spot or a spot where you can take advantage of the hyper armor, it's going to be just such a strong Ash of War. And I think the fact that you see it with so many beginner players, it can kind of mislead you to think that it's not as strong as it is. But when you've played the game for a long time and you kind of know where to place it, you get some feel for when the Ash of War is going to be really useful. It's just incredibly deadly and feels like borderline overpowered. So we'll see that probably a couple more times throughout the course of the duels, where we do just get that neutral light attack followed up by a heavy and then followed up by the Ash of War. I really don't recommend using the Ash of War out of neutral. Occasionally you can use the follow-up heavy that comes after the kind of initial sweep, but for the most part, I found that the initial sweep connecting was going to be your best bet, and the follow-up, if you delay it long enough, that will be an instance where you may be able to catch your opponent, especially like out of the air or something. You might be able to hit them with their jumping attack, and it can be really useful. So next up we have, I believe the same player from before using the bleed build, but at this point they've got the Reduvia Bloodblade. And so I switch my talismans just so I can, take a little bit more blood loss buildup. The Reduvia Bloodblade Ash of War is just pretty brutal. It does bleed damage so fast and also just hits really hard. And here I'm able to bait my opponent in with just kind of a whiffed swing and then follow it up with the second light attack in the chain, and then follow that up with a Bloodhound Fang attack, Ash of War rather, and just come out on top again. So next we have a player that does swap over to the Bloodhound Fang also, and I was pretty happy to see that, then slightly less happy when they used the Blood Flame Blade Ash of War, or incantation there. So, going for the bleed setup is also pretty strong. Just with my playstyle, I prefer the rot setup or a poison setup because for the most part, I don't use bleed too much, but I obviously recognize that it's strong and pretty useful. So this was just kind of a fun mirror match where I was able to kind of come back a little bit. They got me to half health before I had done much damage, and there we can see where a delayed follow-up is really useful. I was able to just wait a little bit and catch them out of the air with the follow-up attack for the Ash of War, and that was the difference maker in that particular fight. So we do get hit with a Sacred Blade attack pretty early on with this player, and they've got an offhand Shamshir, which is pretty fun as a setup and kind of hard to deal with. And I think you need to just play really aggressively when you have opponents like that. And here I'm able to iframe through their Ash of War and just deliver the final blow. Next up, we have a player that's using Lucerin, which is kind of fun. I don't think I use that weapon too much, maybe at all. I know it's just been kind of a favorite from earlier Souls games, so it was kind of fun to see that in the mix. And they go for some Impaling Thrust attacks, which are kind of easy to read, but can catch you off guard. I definitely recommend them not out of neutral. And then eventually they go for a jumping attack, and I'm able to just kind of space appropriately to come in for a backstab and win that one as well. Next, we have a player using the Knight Rider Glaive. So this is a fairly meta setup, and they are going to be eating some crab, so we'll be able to do a little bit more, or we'll be able to land a few more hits in the process to successfully end the fight. And they go for a nice anti-air here, and I think that's a pretty smart approach there, where you go for a running attack, which comes out as a poke, and then expect your opponent to go for a jumping attack. And there they're able to do it again, and they're just able to anti-air me for a second time. And I start to kind of get a feel for the way this player is playing, where I get the feeling that they're going to be able to go for Flaming Strike as soon as I run in. And so I kind of anticipate that, know that I'll be able to tank it with my poise, and rather trade with the beginning part of Flaming Strike with my Ash of War, knowing that my Ash of War is actually going to do more damage because it's going to hit before the second part of their Ash of War. So kind of a good read there, I think, on my part, and just kind of a good like understanding of their play style that I developed throughout the course of the fight. I think I had only played them once. That was the only time that I played them, is what I'm trying to say. So just a good moment there, and I think being able to know where your poise is at and know when to use your Ash of War kind of as a surprise is going to be pretty helpful. And next we have a player using a single lance, and I'm definitely a fan of the single lance setup. I think you can incorporate a lot of different mix-ups, and with the crouching attack being a sweep and then just kind of the different cadence of different attacks, a really strong jumping attack here. So they get me below half health, and things are not really going my way. I haven't done too well, and they hit me with a running attack that turns out to be pretty strong, but here I'm able to just dead angle a couple different hits and get 3 hits in a row and come out with a nice comeback there. So definitely a fun fight there where, you know, being able to land hits and kind of change the timing of them a little bit with some dead angles can be really useful. Having just finished a build about the Knight's Greatsword, I was very accustomed to kind of the dead angling and the adjustment so that your attack frames come out just a little bit quicker. Next up we have this player, Apricot is their username, and I play them a lot, and they always use this setup with a wrought sword as well as a shield, and they go for a lot of guard counters. And they're definitely a really strong player, and they're using a unique setup, which I definitely appreciate. So I always have kind of a good time when I play with them. They're a little bit more predictable at this point now that I've played them so many times, but the first couple times that I played them, they definitely beat me a few times, and were able to use this setup very effectively. They have an Ash of War that they go for a lot of times after a guard counter, and that Ash of War can be very successful. It's a spinning slash, I believe, and just has a lot of hyper armor and does a lot of poise damage. So eventually I was able to come out on top there, but just a shout out to that player, Apricot, if you ever watch this content. I definitely enjoy our fights. So next up we have a player with Bloodhound Step as well as Dual Straight Swords, so kind of a more meta setup here, and I want to be able to catch them out of the air if they go for jumping attacks. That's one of the benefits of a Curved Greatsword, and then just stay aggressive and really utilize the extra poise that I have if I can tank some of their hits and avoid dealing with the iframes that come with Bloodhound Step. It's going to be pretty useful. So this is going to be our final duel here. We have a player with the Guts Greatsword, and they go for a crouching attack followed up by the Chilling Mist, and that's a very dangerous combo. It's a great roll catch, but unfortunately they missed with the poke attack, so I was able to kind of avoid the incoming attack with Chilling Mist. And I'm just really hoping that I don't get frostbitten here. I'm trying to get some nice reads on them, and I am able to kind of roll into a nice backstab setup, so that was good spacing. I go for a wake up with Bloodhound Fang's finesse and didn't quite land it, but we do land 2 just neutral light attacks and come out on top for the final duel of the showcase. If you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching, and now we're going to move on to the details about the build here. So I definitely like having the offhand Antspur Rapier. It's pretty nice to just have a little quick pressuring tool, and just being able to switch to the two-handed moveset, especially if you're facing something like Light Roll. It's going to be pretty solid, but I preferred the two-handed moveset on the Bloodhound's Fang. I just felt like it felt a little bit better. I like the timing, and I like the angle that you get with the sword. So the one-handed moveset is still strong, but for me, just the two-handed moveset was a little bit preferable. And since this weapon does get some strength scaling, it actually gets a C in strength, so you do get the benefit of having the two-handed extra 1.5 strength bonus. As for the stats, we are going to be running this at 138 with a pretty strong spread favoring Dexterity with a little bit of strength, and then the rest just poured into Vigor and Endurance. For anybody looking to see at the AR or any of that stuff, that's going to be on screen right now. And really the equipment we're using, it's just the Bloodhound Fang as well as the Antspur. I had a couple different Antspurs on hand, but I only really used the Poisonous Mist one. I think there's a lot of possible variations you could use, and you could also, instead of Rot Grease, use Poison Grease or something for the Bloodhound's Fang, and that would be a good way to kind of synergize with the Poisonous Mist and poison proc that you're likely to quickly get with the Antspur Rapier. We'll be using the Mushroom Crown to boost our AR when we proc the poison. We'll also use a Tree Sentinel Armor, Tree Sentinel Gauntlets, and Malformed Dragon Greaves to get us to a 1-on-1 poise with the Bullgoat Talisman. You can switch the Shard of Alexander over to the Kindred Rot's Exaltation if you want to further boost your poison-based AR, but I found that I preferred having the Shard of Alexander, so if I got my opponents to half health or something, I could pull off the Ash of War, usually as a roll catch after landing a neutral light attack or something, and that was a really strong way to just kind of finish off an opponent that was not quite at the stage where they were healing yet. So we also have the Crimson Amber Medallion +2 just to boost our HP a little bit, and then we'll use the Greatjar's Arsenal just so we can hold everything with our 32 endurance. To further take advantage of the strength scaling that we get on the Bloodhound Fang, especially with our already very high dexterity, I'd recommend using the strength tier rather than the dexterity tier, just to get you, 34 strength rather than 24 strength, and that's actually going to produce a higher AR than if you used a dexterity not tier. And then I'll also just use the Crimson Bubble tier to, restore HP when I'm close to death. As always, I just wanted to thank you for supporting the content, and if you have any questions about the build or recommendations for future builds you'd like to see, definitely let me know. But yeah, that's all I've got, and I hope you have a good one.